Restaurant Unstoppable, episode 667 with Chef Brad Cecchi. And with excitement, allow me to introduce to you today's guest, Chef Brad Cecchi. My man, Brad, how are you feeling unstoppable today?
I am working on it for sure.
Well, I cannot wait to dive into your story. It's a good one. So raised just outside of Sacramento, California, Chef Brad Cecchi is a graduate of the Culinary Arts program at American River College and the Culinary Institute of America. He would go on to spend the next 7 years working between Sacramento's Mulvaney's and the Grange restaurant. Next, Cecchi made the move to Cleveland, Ohio, where he held the executive chef position at Urban Farmer and the Westin Downtown. In 2016, Cecchi made the move back to California, where he was recruited by Michelin Starred Solbar as the chef de cuisine and later as the executive chef, where he was able to maintain the Michelin Star status for the next 2 years. And in 2017, Cecchi joined forces with Clay Nutting to open Canon, which is recognized as Sacramento's or one of Sacramento's best restaurants, and just recently got its own Michelin Star nod when it was added to the list of Michelin Guide's Bib Gourmand. Just amazing stuff you got going on. Congratulations on all the success. I cannot wait to dive into your story, but let's get that motivational, inspirational ball rolling.
Yeah. With
the success quote or mantra, what do you got for us?
I mean, mise en place. That's that's in my mind. Chance favors the prepared mind. So, if you're there prep wise, if you're there mentally, if you're there, with a good game plan for your day, there's not a lot that can go wrong, and it trickles up from there. From the dishwasher level all the way to the ownership, executive chef level.
I love it.
All that.
I'm assuming most of the people listening to the show are pretty passionate about the industry, but for those newcomers, what is mise en place? Define what mise en place is.
Mise en place means like everything in its place, but it's just a mental. For me, it's a mental preparedness. It's not just. Mise en place can be your oil or your shallots, but it can also be, your uniform, your shoes, your, getting to work on time, like all of the things that allow great restaurants to be great and allow, and really like poor mise en place can also lead to the restaurants that aren't so great, not making it,
Yeah, and mise en place isn't just being organized and neat. I mean, that's what it is, but beyond that, it's not just to look good, right? It's knowing that everything has its place, right?
Totally.
And when I need something, I don't even need to look. I know where it is.
Exactly.
And you're leaning into you're creating a situation where human habit kicks in, right? And you lose less energy because this is so much more efficient. So there's a lot of power in that. Thank you for getting to the details.
Of course.
So where does it start making sense to tell your story? I mean, you seem like pretty early on you're passionate about this industry. 16 years old is what I saw.
I mean, it was around that time. I think 2001, 2002. I had just graduated high school. I was going to American River College. Kind of jumped in. Didn't really have a plan for my life.
Not many of us do when
we're
like 15, 16 years old.
Local community college. I had been into cooking most of my life, and had some family kind of that owned restaurants and things. And so I started the program at American River. They were opening this hotel, the Embassy Suites in Old Sacramento, and was able to kind of like finagle a job there.
Is this when you knew that you were hooked? Like this was your path, or?
I don't think it was quite yet. Like at this point, like it was a job. I was 19. Like it was cool, like getting into the industry, and like there was partying going on. There was like a cool mentality. People like were kind of this pirate
camaraderie.
Right? Yeah, that was really appealing to somebody my age. And then from there, I kind of started taking things a little more seriously. I was recruited. I don't know if that's the right word, but through the school, the American Culinary Federation had like yearly competitions.
Okay.
And being 19, I qualified for the youth category in some of their competitions. And so a team of us went to Las Vegas to compete on the national level to kind of, I think nowadays it would be kind of like the equivalent to like the youngsters version of the Bocuse d'Or. And so we went to compete. We did relatively well, did not, get selected to go to Germany and compete internationally, but through that process met some other chefs and, looking to kind of like hire people or take on apprentices and things like that. And so I think from that moment I was willing to give it a shot. I was also excited to like leave, move out of my parents' house.
Right.
And so I ended up, 4 of us were offered apprenticeships at the Broadmoor in Colorado Springs.
And this is what, you're 17, 16 years old?
Like 19.
Oh, okay,
probably.
I was going to say.
Yeah.
All right.
So my parents weren't quite comfortable with me leaving, but they were also like, he's got to go do something. So I arranged it with the school and was able to like kind of continue my college credit, and I was at the Broadmoor for a little under a year, and it was one of those environments that like I think that everybody hears about as far as like kind of an old school brigade led kitchen, a lot of yelling, a lot of like, you know, intense pressure, a lot
like
of
2005, 2004 around that time.
2002, 2003.
Okay, really? Okay.
Yeah.
So just while we're starting to come out of that culture of the industry, right?
Yeah.
Where this is like the beginning of things starting to change.
It was
right?
definitely, yeah, it was kind of that you're starting to see those things changes. And these are older kitchens. You know, we're talking about chefs and chef de cuisines and outlets is a $300 million a year operation. That resort is huge, right? And so I was in different restaurants and bakeries and butcher shops and over the course of my apprenticeship, and definitely kind of developed this
well-rounded,
like interesting livelihood of fear coupled with passion, coupled with camaraderie, and like it was very, you know, regimented.
Where was the fear coming from?
I was 19 and I didn't have a ton of experience, and I wanted to do the best I could, but like here we are coming down on big numbers, you know, getting 200 on the books for the night, and the other line cooks are kind of poking at me, and you know, like I was kind of this just big dumpy kid with no experience, you know, and like so I felt always stressed about my mise en place and about my day. Was I ready? Was I not ready?
You took it
like,
seriously.
Yeah, 100%. Like, you know, there was the first time that I had ever seen a place that had consequences to quality.
Yeah.
You know, like here in Sacramento at the time in 2000, like the restaurant scene wasn't flourishing. And so like you had a bad day, like especially at like a place like the Embassy Suites where, you know, they're hotel guests, like they're kind of a captured audience, and you know, leaving that and going to the Broadmoor, like you start to deal with like 5-star, 5-diamond, and all of these kind of criteria that really lead to their. So there was pressure on the chefs to kind of execute at quality, and then you have a 19-year-old kid coming in that like could potentially be serving. You know, that was you know, those were like Dick Cheney's undisclosed location days post 9/11, like, and so you know that hotel's right at the base of NORAD, so we had a lot of that, like, you know, military political kind of influence coming in, people staying at the hotel. It was built for, you know, security, and so there was a lot of pressure every day for that.
You said also passion. Is this when you kind of knew that you're on, you know, you're here for the long haul? Like, this is it
for sure.
When did you know?
I mean, I can remember one specific night. You know, we had Dick Cheney was dining at the chef's table inside the Charles Court restaurant, the Broadmoor, and you know, it was in the kitchen, and then we had a full reservation book, and you know, and it's that one kind of like night where you knock it out of the park, right? The service is busy, you're on top of your mise en place, you don't run out of anything, like your stuff's all hot, the chef gives you a compliment, like,
nice.
You know, it was that moment where I'm like, you know, get a high five from some of the older guys that have worked there.
Man, that's awesome.
You know, they take me back to their, like, you know, because it was like a lot of it was like employee housing, because there was a lot of people from all over the world that they would get to come work there.
Yeah.
And so like you go back to their employee housing, I'm 19, they're giving me beer, and like, you know, it felt, that whole thing just felt real.
Yeah.
And you feel proud of it, right? It wasn't just, you know, burgers and fries and pizza and, you know, overcooked chicken. It was like a real fine dining restaurant, and like we were doing a good job.
Yeah, and the things I'm pulling out, you mentioned camaraderie too, being recognized by the chef, and the feel of accomplishment, right? These are all things that are tapping into your higher needs as a human. Those I always refer to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right?
Yeah.
But after you have that security and that safety, and above that, you need to belong, camaraderie, right? Like you belong. And when you're going through hell with people, that bond is always so much stronger because you're going through it together.
Yeah.
And then to be recognized, I think that's where passion comes from.
Oh yeah.
Because we need to belong. We need to be recognized for being good at something, and when we're recognized and rewarded for a job well done, that's like a dose of endorphins just rush through your body, and it's addictive.
It's the same, like you know, like I casually play golf. You know, you hit a good tee shot, and amongst 18 terrible ones, and that one tee shot keeps coming back, right?
Yeah.
It's like it's those attaboys kind of can carry. I always call it like an emotional bank account.
Yeah.
You know, so where like you have to make deposits along the way with the people that work for you, but you have to make withdrawals. You know, there's certain moments in the day where like somebody messes up and you're like, that's wrong. Like that's wrong. And if you are on somebody all the time and they're wrong all the time, you're going to overdraft, you know, you're going to overdraw that bank account, and they're not going to want to work for you. So you have to take teaching moments, and you have to take, you know, slaps on the back, and you have to take attaboys, and you have to take all of those things to kind of like, you know, keep your cooks with you.
Yeah, and you owe it to them because our skills are relative to what we know.
Right.
And we might be really good at something, but we don't know that we're really good at something until we're recognized or somebody points it out.
Right.
So if you recognize somebody has skill, you make sure you let them know because they won't know otherwise, and you might help them become passionate.
Yeah,
you know,
100%.
it's so important. Is it worth spending any more time here, or should we move on to the next experience?
Yeah, I think we move on. I came back to Sacramento. You know, it was kind of one of those things. The first time away from home, like, you know, I had my buddies and I had like all the people that I knew growing up, and like I missed home a little bit. I'd had a girlfriend that we moved out to Colorado together. We were both in the industry, and she went on to, you know, other things, and I went back home, and so at that moment, I went back to the Embassy Suites for a minute. You know, I got a job working at a kind of a nightclub, and it wasn't, you know, go from doing something like that to going like to this nightclub, I think was like it was a reason to kind of look at the party and atmosphere. You know, I was turning 21, and like that part of it kind of like
get it out of your system.
Yeah, totally. Right. And like, so you're looking at this new restaurant opening, you know, not to say any names, but this was 2004. There, you know, the Kings were like winning all these games, and one of the players had opened up this nightclub, and, you know, I got a job as a sous chef there, and, you know, but it wasn't fulfilling. It was,
why not?
It just, the food was all kind of mundane. You know, it was about the party atmosphere. It wasn't about the quality of the cuisine. So for me, it wasn't fulfilling. You know.
So what was missing? What would it have needed to be present to not feel like it was kind of a
I think
waste?
it was the guests, right? The guests weren't there to eat. They were there to party, and they were there to dance.
You're a byproduct. You're an afterthought.
I'm just there if they get too drunk and hungry, and it's like, you know, that, and they don't care what they're eating. And so for me, it wasn't. And then I got injured in that time, like not on the job, but like outside of work, and so I broke my leg, and I ended up packing up and moving to Bar Harbor, Maine.
Oh man.
And, you know, me and my two best friends got a job in a little pizza joint out in Maine, and, you know, I tossed pizzas for a summer and like loved it.
Awesome.
You know, because it was everything I wanted. I was getting like, the pizza place was awesome. It was kind of one of those places in New England that like people flock to from all over, right? They go to their vacation every year in Bar Harbor, and they would go to Rosalie's, and they made sure that they were there once on their trip every time they went, right? And so I was like, you know, tossing pizzas, and it was like a hand toss to order, you know, out on display, like old kind of mom and pop place. And
so you're getting that recognition.
Yeah, we're like slinging like 500 pizzas a night, you know, and it was awesome, right? And then we were making good money. We were living in employee housing. Like, you know, I was with my best friends who, you know, are not in the industry now, and that was their only industry job ever. And you know, we saved enough money to move to Europe.
Oh, damn. Where was this in your bio?
Well, I mean, these are kind of things that like they were you know, they were huge influences in my life, but they were not like professional things, right? Like, you know, to put so much room on a bio to put like I worked in like a mom and pop pizza place, but like you know, those things as far as mise en place and, you know, speed and efficiency and effectiveness and like all those
must
things.
Have been a rock star.
That was awesome. Like I loved it.
Yeah. So you went to Europe, but what was the intention behind that trip? Just to explore,
taste food, like, you know.
Where were you gone?
We spent quite a bit of time in base of operations. One of my buddies has a family in Belgium, just outside Antwerp. So we spent a lot of time there, and then use that as a base to just kind of go to Spain and Italy, and we spent a lot of time in Eastern Europe while we were working at the pizza place. There was a lot of Eastern European like med students that would go work there for the summer. So like we would go party with them, or, you know, stay with them for a couple weeks, and it was great. Like
I think it's so important for young professionals to get out and travel and to get experience, to get that breadth of just this is what the industry is like, and this is what it can be like in different verticals. What advice do you have for somebody to be able to set themselves up to be able to travel? How were you able to do it?
You know, like honestly, it was a moment in time where my buddy was like, "Hey, my uncle owns this pizza place. Like, you want to go?" I'm like, "Yeah, let's go. Yeah, we'll figure it out. We'll save money." And we did. We honestly like didn't have a penny when we moved there.
Were you in debt? Because you went to 2 culinary schools up to this point, right?
Well, so American River College, at this point, no, I had not gone to the CIA yet.
Gotcha.
So at American River was a community school. So it was like, you know, whatever, $10 a unit. My parents were helping pay for that, and like I was kind of like involved in the school, but I was able to take time to go away and come back and kind of in and out. So then coming back from Europe, I was like jazzed, right? Like I've seen all this culture and all this like, you know, old world food. And even like, you know, when you're on a shoestring budget backpacking through Europe, like you can still get, great pastries
Yeah.
or great wine or great whatever, in a plastic water bottle. And so coming back, like I landed back in Sacramento, and I got a job with this catering company.
Real quick, I'm curious about something. Do you think that if you were to say go to CIA and then have the desire to travel, do you think you would have been able to pull it off?
No.
Would you wouldn't have been able to pull off? Why not?
It's expensive.
Yeah. And I think that's the point that I'm trying to make.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people have aspiration to go to the best culinary school, and there's a lot of pressure on young people to go to college straight out of high school, like immediately out of high school. Don't do it, man. Like, go
totally.
learn, figure out
Especially
the industry you love, right?
And travel. Like that one
Yeah.
is rough, and that's what happened. I came back from Europe. I got a good job with a great company and found some people that I really latched onto. We're friends to this day.
Yeah.
And a guy named Chris Jackson, and a guy named Jake DePew were my chef and sous chef, and it was the three of us kind of like feeding off each other. And it was just us, and
That's awesome.
it was great. And at the time, I was dating a girl who is now my wife. And she broke my heart right in half. Man,
looks like she put the pieces back together.
Yeah, she did. It took her a little while, but we got there.
Okay.
And so she, broke my heart. Moved to wherever Argentina.
You still
or
give her
Germany.
shit about that all the time.
All the time.
I bet.
Yeah. I mean, and so then I was like, well, what am I gonna do? I want to be taken seriously. I want to be the best that I can be. At this point, like I'm passionate. I have some skill, but I look back on those days and now, and I'm like, what was I thinking? Like, why would I ever come up with that idea? Like that food was, like I'm like raspberry vinaigrette and craisins and blue cheese, right? Like it's no offense to anybody who does that, but like I was not reinventing the wheel at the time. So, I decided that like it was time to go, right? And so I took out the loans and I was on my own. I was 23, 24 years old, and I needed somebody to validate me, right? And that's not necessarily about like what they were going to teach me. It was that they were going to help validate me and place me in the places that I wanted to be.
Any key mentors that had a real influence on you while?
I think in that moment, like there's Michael Pardis, who like you read about him in all the like Michael Rollman books, right? He was my Cuisines of Asia instructor, and he's one of those guys that's like particular and like not mean, but like serious and taking it all very serious. And that was some direct, right? And that was something that like he was able to kind of see the difference between kids out of high school whose parents may be paying for this, who aren't taking it seriously, and then the people who were.
And that's the other variable about waiting 3 or 4 years to go to the CIA after getting that experience is you're going to spend, you grow up a lot, especially men. Like our frontal lobe doesn't fully develop until we're 26, So your 100%. Rationality, you're so much more mature and you make the best out of that time. And you recognize the value of the network that's at your disposal. And I think young people just don't see it.
Yeah. Well, and the one thing about that school is like, it is one, and Greystone has since like opened up their AOS program, but like I went to Hyde Park and in New York. And so the one thing about that place is it is the best cooking facility on the planet, probably. Like it's, Hogwarts. It's all, it's all the things that like you look for from the library to the teachers, to the, facilities, to the immersion of it. Like it's great. And if you're not getting enough out of it, you're paying way too much money.
Yeah.
And so for me, I was able to use that facility to my own advantage and achieve my own agenda. But I watched people kind of squander that chance.
So you were talking about this professor. His name escaped my mind.
Michael Pardis.
Michael Pardis, and he said that he recognized those who were in it for like because they have to go to college and it's time to grow up, and those who were like really taking it seriously, not just going through the motions, but they're there intentionally. Yeah, that's where you left off before I interrupted you. What was your train of thought?
So at that, like I was kind of already there. In the way that the CIA works is that they have like blocks, and you're with the same group your whole time there, and so you kind of develop this team atmosphere, and you lean on one another like a true brigade to kind of like execute, and you take the good with the bad, and you become a leader in the group or you don't. And I think that is where chefs ultimately end up falling in their professional careers anyway. You're either a leader or you're not. And so, he was able to recognize that in me and some other people in the class. And
what made you a leader? Paint that picture of what made you a leader. What were you doing?
I was older. So I was definitely older. I was experienced. I wasn't uncomfortable with like the kitchen environment, the, you know, behind or hot or this or that. Like I was able to kind of figure those things out. I had a base set of kind of knowledge of like certain technique. And then finding out the hows and the whys was really interesting to me. So I was able to ask the right questions and, you know, and do the right extracurriculars and, cause I was into it, right?
Yeah.
I was there for that reason.
We're 20 minutes into this conversation. We're only at your culinary experience, like your culinary education, which is fine by me, but this might go a little more than an hour.
Yeah, well, I'm
cool?
good. Yeah.
All right. As long as you're cool, I'm cool. So, when did were you going back and forth? Didn't you take some time off from the CIA to go help open a restaurant? And then you
No.
finished,
So, you have your externship.
Yep.
So I did my externship, for Bradley Ogden at the Lark Creek Inn in Larkspur, which is since closed. And I spent some time working with the Lark Creek Restaurant Group, because it was pretty impactful on my life. And that was one of those situations where like here was like a chef who had made something of not just a restaurant, but of like an entire restaurant group and a career. And I was really, you know, and that he had opened a restaurant in Sacramento and Roseville before I went to school, and I knew people that worked for him. And so it was kind of like I was into the style of food. It was just very much just like, you know, the California cuisine of the 90s, right? This Jeremiah Tower, Bradley Ogden, Alice Waters, like, you know, those kinds of cooking, you know, like not quite to where we are with like farm to fork or farm to table now, but like it was kind of this like matter of circumstance. These people were getting things locally because that's what was there. And so I grew to appreciate that in a way that was like a very like American cuisine, right? He cooked with a very American sense of palate and very American sense of quality. You know, I think some of those other chefs may have a little more like Franco Mediterranean type style, but it spoke to me.
Okay.
And so I spent some time, and then I went back to school and graduated, and came back with no idea. Like I could have gone back to work for them. I was missing home a little bit.
This time you're 22, 23 years old. You're still a young guy.
Yeah, 23, 24, something like that. I think this was 2006.
Okay.
And so I'm you know, kind of wanting to come home. I missed home a little bit, and at that time there were some restaurants opening, like some new restaurants that were exciting, and so Mulvaney's building alone. Patrick Mulvaney had just started to open his restaurant, and he was doing a very similar thing to what Bradley Ogden was doing.
So is that what was appealing to you, the style of food?
Because for me, I was like leaving, and my mom sends me this article, and it fit.
Somebody wanted you to come back home.
Right, totally. But it fit what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
It was my style. It was my, you know, and working for Patrick was, you know, he's one of those people that's like, he's intense, and he owns his own restaurant, and he, you know, is looking at the bottom line, and he's looking at the quality, and he's looking at, you know, his, you know, for lack of a better term, like political status in the community, right? Like, where do you fall as far as like popularity goes, and what, you know, are your reviews and your connections and your networking? Is that all working? And for me, I landed in a great spot at a great time.
And you came on when they were opening the restaurant, right? So you got to experience that process of opening.
Right.
What was that? Was the first time you opened a restaurant, right?
Well, the Embassy Suites open. I was on that opening team, but I was, you know.
So this time around with the opening, how are you looking at it differently? How are you getting more involved?
Well, I was working lunch, and I was kind of the only lunch cook. There was one other guy, and we started cooking lunch together. He ended up, you know, moving to dinners, and I kind of stuck with this lunch thing by myself, and it just became, it was busy restaurant. They have a busy catering company. There was a busy environment. The restaurant itself is kind of like very eclectic, so it's kind of thrown together. It's not like this professional big kitchen. It's a small neighborhood restaurant kitchen, and so I was able to kind of be left a little bit autonomous, but at the same time, like taking direction from Patrick, and, you know, kind of coupling that with like sharing mise en place with the dinner crew and things like that. So it was a really interesting time for me.
Any key lessons about opening a restaurant during this time? Things you didn't realize, or maybe it was just too early in your career?
I mean, I've since opened 10.
So maybe we'll hold off on that question.
It was at the time, you know, you're just like, at that time for me, it was like, I'm going to make some money here.
Yeah.
Because like I'm working overtime. I'm working, you know, it's every, I remember that first December we were open, like the chef quit, and, you know, we came in one day and they were like, I was there, and I called Patrick on the phone. I go, yeah, dude quit. Like, he's like, all right, well, we got offsite for this many tonight. We got offsite for this many this afternoon. You got lunch, dinner, blah, blah, blah. You guys like get to work. So
awesome.
You know, we were able to kind of pull it off and then, you know, make some good money in that first holiday season.
Yeah. You mentioned something else that really kind of stood out to me. I want to draw some light on it, the political status. It's almost unfortunate how much success in this industry has to do with how popular you are.
Yeah, it does, right? But like,
it's true, but people want to be associated with the cool kids. They want to go to where the cool kids are, right?
Yeah.
What did you learn about political status and how to climb that ladder?
I think, well, so in that time, it was like you see, this is a political town, first of all. So like you see Patrick kind of talking to business people and politicians and things like that. And it became
Sacramento is the capital of California,
right?
Which is why it's a political town.
Yeah, exactly.
For those not aware. Keep going.
And so, you know, to see that standing and then to see how busy it became, right? And it built off of that. And that, you know, 2006 is the height of like the Food Network and all these Iron Chef and all these other things.
Buzz, right? The advent of the smartphone. So
right?
People are sharing food pictures all over the place, right?
And so I saw that happen and I was like, I kind of figured it out. I was like, because it's easy to resent a chef when they're not in the kitchen. You know, it's very easy to have that mentality like they don't work. But at that time, that's when and not that Patrick wasn't. Patrick was working his ass off. But like, you know, it was to see that part of the business be just as important as the other part. And really, you're kind of like pitching. You're throwing the pitch to your kitchen staff to hit it out of the park, right? So like, you know, Patrick was telling these people how good his restaurant was, and then they have to come in and then you have to execute. So like he has to back up what he's saying. And so for me, like I saw that and I was like, I got it. You know, I wasn't resentful about it. I understood what was happening and I was like, okay, file that away for later.
Yeah. I mean, there's something to be said about having presence in your restaurant and to be there. And, you know, nobody's going to work harder in your restaurant than you're going to work in your restaurant. So I get that. But at the same time, you can't grow your business if you're constantly working in
if
it.
You're working the line.
Yeah. You know, if you're yeah, exactly. If you're working the line, you're not going to be out there. You're not going to be able to work on your business. That's what he was doing.
You know, he is and was the maitre d' of that restaurant from the day it opened till now. And so, you know, people come in there to see him and he visits tables and he's, you know, making sure that their quality's there. He's sending them out a little taste of dessert wine or a little, you know, shot of Redbreast in his case. And like, you know, all these things. And I kind of see that and I'm like, you know, at the time and I'm like, okay, I get this. Right. And so I had an opportunity to work in this little tiny bistro in Fair Oaks. And so as a young 25-year-old chef who's like looking to make some, you know, some of my own creative decisions, I'm like, all right, cool, I'm gonna take this job. It's like, and then I found myself in this area where I'm not popular.
We're still at Mulvaney's.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so this is kind of in conjunction.
Gotcha.
You know, I get my buddy who's opening this restaurant, and he's like, hey, can you come work nights over here and help be the chef de cuisine? It was just me, and then I'm working days at Mulvaney's, and I'm seeing. At one hand, I'm at the top of the, you know, at that time, you know, the top of the restaurant community in Sacramento, working in the best restaurant in town. And then I'm going at night to like the suburbs and I'm trying to do good food and I'm just by myself and we're doing nights of zero covers. And so like, I'm not popular, right? Like I'm not drawing, there's not enough PR behind this whole engine. And so that's when I kind of realized that like, that's important.
Yeah.
And, you know, so I end up leaving Mulvaney's to go over there full time to kind of do that. And I'm there maybe like 6 months. And
you're there to get popular.
Well, I'm there to just kind of like do my own
build
thing,
your name,
right? To
build
get
a
my own
reputation,
name, to be creative and like do my own food. But I'm 25. And like, you know, you ask any chef, you know, the 25-year-old version of themselves, well, not any chef, but most chefs, and the 25-year-old version of themselves is, you know, their food cost is high and their labor cost is high and they're, you know, they're throwing stuff in the garbage. They're not forecasting. They're not scheduling. They're not doing all of the things that are important to making a successful business. So the place closed. And I will take some credit for running into the ground. But
these are the lessons we learned the hard way.
Totally.
You know? Like, and you don't know until you know.
Yeah.
Until you have, you know, fallen hard on your face and you have to get back. The only thing you can do is get back up. But we've all been there, you know.
Totally.
So 6 months. What was the next move?
Grange.
Okay. And
so
what was going through your mind? Like,
I'm terrified.
You're terrified?
You know, like I went from being like this chef doing my own thing, but I was by myself, so it wasn't like I was like running a kitchen.
Yeah. Where were you emotionally at this time? Your ego was a little burnt.
Definitely bruised.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I definitely kind of was like, and now I'm going to look for a line cook position. And so I'd gone from Mulvaney's, kind of running my own lunch thing, and then I'm at this little bistro, and like I'm feeling pretty good about myself, feeling pretty good about my creativity, and then I'm looking for a line cook job.
So what was the strategy there? Did you just want to like get money coming in? Were you just trying to like
money was important?
Yep.
I looked. So I heard about this hotel opening, and they're bringing in this guy from Atlanta who kind of was really into this farm-to-table cooking, and like they were going to open this, Sacramento's hotel, right? And I'm like, okay, cool. There's an opportunity at hotels. You can generally make a little more money.
Yep.
I had enough experience to kind of hopefully get in at the supervisor level. And so I get a job. I end up landing a job. I get a nice recommendation from Patrick, and I'm able to kind of land there. And I think we weren't even open yet, and I was promoted to sous chef. And it's one of those things. It's just hard work, right? I busted my ass. I'm packing boxes, and
well, that's another thought that in the back of my mind. It's great if you have aspirations to open a restaurant. Go to work with a restaurant group, or go to work at a hotel that's open. Go be a part of openings,
right?
Because openings are a totally different beast than running a restaurant, right? And the other variable, if you get on early, fast promotion. Some people don't work out, right? Some people are high. Like you can climb the ladder quick, and
that's the story of my career.
Yeah,
I mean that Grange to this day is. I feel like when I walk in that building, like it's still mine. Like I feel like I was, the kind of like the line cook position spewing into a sous chef position, and then people started leaving, right? Sous chefs would leave, and then the chef de cuisine left, and then I was promoted to chef de cuisine, and then the executive chef left, and I was kind of running the deal by myself. Well, not by myself, but with sous chefs and kind of a temporary executive chef role. Yep. I was in conjunction with that applying for the executive chef job at 27.
Yeah.
And so I was really like immature about it. Those were the days in my life where I was like the screamer.
Yeah.
And the belittler, and the, like I couldn't figure out for the life of me like why people weren't following me.
Did you listen to Oliver Ridgeway's episode?
I mean, I haven't listened to it yet. No. Does he talk about me?
He does talk about it just a little bit. He says he has a lot of great things to say about you, but in the episode, and I'll link to it in the show notes, he talks about his transition over to the Granger.
Yeah.
And he came on. You were like, technically, I mean, a lot of people you may have assumed that you were going to get the executive chef role. But they brought in Oliver Ridgeway, right? And he talked a little bit about the dynamic of your relationship when he first came on.
Yeah.
That might have been a little bit of a tension there.
For
was
sure.
there? Yeah.
I mean, 100%. Like, I wanted that job so bad.
Yeah.
And, like, that restaurant was mine. Like, I really, I didn't own it, but, like, I felt that everything I did was, like, hitting the plate. And, like, for the first time, like, I was working with a place that was popular, and I was working with, like, a certain status in the building, and I was working with like a budget, right? Like a hotel budget. Like I had all the money in the world to spend. And, I had sous chefs, and I had all the things. And like, here I am, like, trying to get business too, trying to like figure out how to get the numbers right so that like they hire me for this job. And then Oliver comes in to do his tasting, and I'm like, fuck, and he did a good job, and he was a nice guy, and like he had this resume come from Rosewood, and like, I remember like I'm in the parking lot of like the movie theater getting ready to go see The Hangover, the first Hangover movie, and I get the call from Troy Christian, who is one of my mentors to this day. We end up going to Cleveland together later on in the story, but Troy calls me, and he was the F&B director, and he's all, "You didn't get it," and I just like I cried. Like
man.
I knew I was 27 years old. I was looking at a 6-figure payday. Like I'm ready to like get going.
Yeah, you've been busting your ass too. You've earned it.
Totally. Yeah. And like that was a year almost of like Michael Toohey was gone. Oliver Ridgeway had yet to be hired, and I was running the place, and it wasn't sinking.
Yeah.
And I was like, I got this. And it didn't happen. And so at that moment, I'm like, all right, what do I do? But here I am making great money. Like there wasn't another place in Sacramento for me to go. And so Oliver and I had a little tension, like there would be things like when you're a new chef coming into a building, like you try to put your foot down and you try to say, I'm the boss, and who's the alpha male. And I'm very much an alpha type person.
Yeah.
And
you were the leader,
And I
you're
was.
stepping down. So that's gotta it's gotta be hard.
And we were 5 years in, or not 5 years, probably like 3 years in at that point.
Yeah.
And like a lot of these
So
staff
you got
members,
tenure too.
Yeah, a lot of these staff members have been there since the beginning. We opened this place together. We went through the trenches together. And so like, Oliver's telling them to do something. They're just kind of like looking over at me to see if it's okay. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, like, I remember one specific, it was like New Year's Eve or something. The pastry chef, wasn't ready. And Oliver was like, came down on her. And I was like, don't talk to my people like that.
Ooh.
And like, that's like you don't say that to your boss, right? Like, that's not a thing you do.
Was this something that you said privately or in front of?
No, it was I think it was pretty private, or like.
It would have been worse if it was.
Yeah, it wasn't like I screamed it across the kitchen,
Yeah.
But I was like, she's trying her best. Like, give her a break. She doesn't know you. Like, and I think from that moment on, like right around that moment, I don't think it was that specific moment, but like Oliver and I started figuring it out. Like.
Well, yeah. What was that? I'm curious. What was the catalyst that helped kind of make things be okay between the two?
Oliver's a really good leader of people, and I wasn't at that time. I was like in HR all the time, and the union, it's a union house. Like the union was like out to get me. And
what kind of give me the worst HR story you have while you were?
I don't even know if I should say it. I mean, it's out there. There's people that know it, but like I threw things at people. And like
we all evolve, man.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Right. And I was young, and so I'd come close a couple of times. There's like SVPs of food and beverage that work for other companies now that were working for Joie de Vivre at the time that are like, I saved your ass. And I'm like, okay. And there wasn't just one of them, right? They all thought they saved my ass. And I'm like, okay, yeah, you probably did then.
Sorry, I cut you short. Yeah, keep going.
And so Oliver was really good about, he kind of saw that in me, and that he could use that part of me to help him. But also like, he started asking me about Sacramento. He started letting me show him the farmer's market and introduce him to people. And like, he included me in running that restaurant day to day, rather than just making me his number two and telling me what to do all the time. And I continued to work there for 2.5 more years, as his number two. And like, in that time, like he brought me everywhere, every chef event, the first Tower Bridge dinner that we have in Sacramento, it's a big deal. Like he let me, be me. He let me be out there, and he let me, hang out with my friends, and he let me like talk to other chefs. And like, or oftentimes like, sous chefs and stuff get relegated to like the back, clean up and get out of here. And the chefs kind of have their wine with the guests. But he brought me out there.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's beautiful the reason why it sounds like you didn't get the promotion was because you had to evolve more as a leader, as a manager. 100%. And then Oliver came in and he had those skills. He was strong in those areas. And what ways did he help you evolve as a professional? What did you learn about him from management and leadership? How did he imprint on you during these 2 years?
It was just rallying people around me. It was making people appreciate me for not just, like working hard. Like the physical work was not something that I stopped doing, but it was like, how do you empower people? How do you set them up for success? How do you, I think something I learned from him was like, the chef at the end of the day, in a restaurant that big or an operation that big, is like, you're responsible for giving people the tools that they need to succeed. It's not at that point, it's not about, can you cut onions faster than anybody else? Can you cook more than anybody else? Can you, it's about leadership, and it's about like giving people the tools. So like if people walk into the dry storage and there's no fryer oil, and they're like, I don't have the tools to do my job. He was a big proponent of like, give them the tools to do their job, make sure that our ordering's tight, make sure that our finances are good, like allow people to grow. And it really stuck with me.
You said he rallied people around you. What do you mean by that?
He gave me decision-making abilities, but he also kind of like held my hand through the process, right? Like I had become a little rough around the edges, and he kind of made it, he smoothed out those edges a little bit, and he made me approachable to other people. He allowed me to kind of live in a space without, I was so concerned with consequences. Like for the longest time, a year, I was trying to get this executive chef job. And so I thought that every point over I was on my food costs, or every labor point I was over, or every bad review on Yelp or whatever, like that I was going to lose this job. And I was so like tight on the consequences.
So how was he smoothing you out? How was he rounding off the edges? I mean, was he
supporting me.
advocating for you?
He was at, I mean, 100%.
Okay.
You know, he was up and with like higher management, you know, trying to find me.
He was championing you.
Yeah.
Like, you know, and that's what you got to be. You got to, like you said, rally around your people. You got to fight for your people. You got to show your people that you value them and go to bat for them and defend them, right?
Totally.
And when you show that you care for somebody, they're going to naturally reciprocate and care for you. And it sounds like that's how he won you over.
And that's how it was. And Oliver is, to this day, one of my best friends in the whole world.
Yeah, and you mentioned also that he made you a part of it. You were his number two, but like he wasn't dictating to you. Like he let you still have that level of influence that you had before he came on board.
Totally. He didn't take anything away from me. He let me be me, let me be creative. And it was something that, like, you know, when I was ready 2.5 years later, you know, and someone came to offer me the big job.
All right, we're back, and you're just about to say the big opportunity came. What was the big opportunity?
Well, so at the time, Troy Christian, who was the food and beverage director and general manager, long time at Grange. Like, he was not there on the opening team, but shortly after. And so him and I became very close. And he took a job with Sage Hospitality. And at that time, it was a company within Sage called Sage Restaurant Group that was doing these kind of like independent, high-end marketing, like independent restaurants within big box hotels. And so, you know, they had done an Urban Farmer at the Nines Hotel in Portland, where Departure is, as well as one of the Sage Restaurant Group hotels. And, you know, so they were getting ready to open the Westin in downtown Cleveland, and it was a big project for Cleveland. They were kind of vying for like the 2016 Republican National Convention, and they were looking to build all of this stuff. It was between stints at LeBron stints at the Cavaliers, and so the city was kind of like looking for something. And you know, they offered me. Well, they didn't offer me the job. I had to interview. I flew to Denver a couple of times. I did tastings. I did the whole thing, and you know, and I was looking at like this farm-to-table steakhouse. I had developed a name in Sacramento doing like cured meats and butchery and charcuterie, and so the concept spoke to me. At the same time, like, I had experience in hotels, but I was young. I was 29, and you know, I was nervous about the gig. It was a 480 room hotel, more than twice the size of the Citizen, the 300 seat restaurant, more than twice the size of Grange. I had a Starbucks. I had all this banquet facility. I had like 20,000 square feet of kitchen space, and 9 sous chefs and 3, you know, department leaders, and this whole thing. And I was like, yeah, I got this, whatever, you know, and so I went up to Portland for 3 or 4 months and worked at the Urban Farmer up there, and kind of figured out, like, I had never worked in like a big box hotel before. The Citizen is like, you know, we plated the banquets, you know, to order, and like, so that's I'm looking crazy. At like packing in, you know, banquets of like 500-600 people, and I'm like, I don't know how to do this.
Well, you figured it out.
Fake it till you make it, right?
Yes.
And so I was able to kind of figure out. It took a year from the time I got hired until the day we opened the doors. I had a year to like figure out the budgets and figure out the menus and figure out how to do this. And then like,
where'd you go to learn how to do this? I mean, you must have been calling people, leading friends,
calling people, reading, you know, talking to people.
What would you read to learn how to do that?
Just like real, like the pro chef, like, you know, books from the CIA about like garde manger and buffets, and like, you know, and then like learning and reading like industry kind of magazines about like, you know, not like Food and Wine, like, you know, Buffet Monthly or whatever, you know, to kind of figure out how to do these things. And then the steakhouse.
No podcast back then around this stuff.
Totally. You know, and then the steakhouse, I was like, I got that.
Yeah.
Like, I figured, I mean, that part was easy. Like, they had a really good concept. I'd found the right butchers, and, you know, we had a 6,000 square foot restaurant that, like, you know, we were bringing in whole animals, and we were doing, so that part was like, I got this, and I had the right people in place. The banquet stuff, the room service stuff, the Starbucks, like, that stuff was a challenge. And like,
you were managing a Starbucks too?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
And so
I wouldn't think that,
because it's a big convention.
I wouldn't think that they would keep the management for a Starbucks in house. I think I would just assume that they would have somebody else.
They do like a licensing agreement in hotels. You know, it's a licensing agreement. So like, you know, you pay Starbucks a certain amount of money, but then you kind of manage it. You buy their products.
You're not making any decisions there because you're being forced into a mold. So you just kind of
manage the labor, and you manage the cost of goods and make sure nobody's stealing. And so that was like, I was super overwhelmed, you know, and like I had like
imagine.
my bosses.
You're quoted as saying this is the most difficult thing you had to do, like
ever.
Yeah,
Still.
weren't you, like? Did I see that you were going home and crying some nights?
Oh
or
yeah,
something?
100%. Like I remember just.
I don't mean to laugh at you.
No, but like curling up next to my wife, and I'm just like there till I got there at 6 a.m. I got home at 2 a.m. Like I spent, you know, at that night that I remember just sobbing. I'm like,
what was going through your mind?
I was like, I spent 3 hours unwrapping glass racks and like organizing them, and like I wanted to win, and that was.
Were you afraid you weren't going to win?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't know what I was doing. And so I had these other, you know, my bosses, my corporate level chefs from like the Urban Farmer, you know, corporate chef, then Sage's corporate chef. Like they were all around. This was a big project for Sage at the time. And like they were all there breathing down my neck.
Yeah, I don't
like,
want to disappoint people.
You know, and then there's like task force coming in. They're kind of like the spies and and I'm like just trying to like impress them all. Right. And so I worked my tail off, and I was there a lot, and I was young. So I was like, it didn't, you know, we didn't have kids. Like my wife was, you know, staying home at that time. So like there was a little bit of forgiveness there, but like it was tough. And then, you know, you couple that with like where here we are, like 2013, like Cleveland quite hasn't rebounded from like the recession yet. And like, so the staffing was really difficult. Like I remember firing like 75 people in a week.
That must be rough.
Because you're trying to hire 150 people at once, and they're not passing drug tests, or they're not, you know, they have criminal records or whatever, and then you're just calling people into your office. Sorry, didn't work out. You didn't pass. And every one of those that goes out, you know, every 5 of those that goes out, one of them's good, and you can't, you know, you don't want to lose them. And, you know, and then you're like, where do I go from here? And you're replacing them with somebody that's like a temp, or so like the labor component was, and so that is when like, I was like, all right, cool. I put down my knives. I put down my saute pans, my towels. I pressed, you know, I sent my chef coat to the dry cleaners. I put on dress shoes, and I was like, the only way that I'm going to figure this out is to outthink it. I can't work through this. You know, I have to let my department heads and my sous chefs do their jobs, and I have to outthink this. So how do you do that?
So when you say outthink, you're saying you need to remove yourself from the day-to-day so you can be at top-level management, so you can be delegating and looking at whatever you need to look at to figure out how to solve the problem.
Right.
That takes energy. You know?
It takes energy. And like, you know, like Oliver taught me, like you have to give all these people the tools. And so if I'm not able to teach my butchers how to make the charcuterie or cut a, you know, whole steer, if I'm not able to get my pastry chef on board and hold her accountable to like having the right recipes and written in a certain way that people can follow, and, you know, checks and balances in place for people getting set up, and for, you know, not serving like old food, or, you know, this was a huge place. And it's like, so, you know, stewarding staff, like how do we get plates from here, this from the 3rd floor to the basement to back and counted, and, you know, like there's spreadsheets and all these things that need to happen in order to achieve those goals. And so once I figured that out, I felt like I started making really big strides towards like getting it, you know, and just around that time I get a call. It says, you interested in coming home? And I'm like, yeah. Like the winters in Cleveland
I think the big lesson to pull from this is you got to think through it. I think maybe were those the words you used? I
mean, that's it. You got to how do I outthink?
Yeah.
How do I outthink the physical limitations of what I'm capable of doing?
Yeah, and if you're putting all of your energy into doing the stuff, if you're stuck in the business, you won't have the additional bandwidth you need, the additional energy you need to think. Thinking takes a lot of energy.
Totally.
Our brains are massive energy suckers, and when we're, you know, it takes we have to you know, put that energy aside to be able to think through these things.
Well, and
remove yourself.
You allow people to achieve their full potential too. You know, like you if you provide somebody with all the tools, right, a properly written recipe that's measured in the right way, that's not like a pinch of this and a dash of this, it's grams of this and
keep
ounces
going into the
this.
tools. That would be a great thing if you could you just mentioned the tools, the recipes, right?
Yeah.
What else do we need? What
so
other
it's
tools?
recipes and checklists, and, you know, like at Canon, and we're not quite there yet, but like
it takes time.
All of our life every day operates in the Google Drive every day. So like, you know, there's a clipboard that has every item at every station, and like it's color coded to say who does that. If it's the line cook that does it, or the prep cook that does it, or the sous chef that does it, you know, that feeds a prep list. The prep list feeds an order guide. That order guide, all of it gets put into the computer so that like I can check it from my phone, and then you can hold all that accountable.
Yeah.
And then you write recipes that are like written in grams and have appropriate yields, and like then you're not looking at like having to, and then you taste it once, so you're not having to like, I don't have to make soup because I taste it and there's salt. Like I measured the salt. It's not like seasoned.
You're
with salt and
recreating yourself in these systems and processes and
to.
tools because you can't be there to keep everything in place.
Right.
You need the framework, the systems, right?
Right.
And that's what you're creating. Awesome stuff. So you get the call. It's time to come back home.
Yeah.
Who was the call from?
So Jan Birnbaum was a chef in the Bay Area for a long time.
You know what? I wanted to ask you about somebody before we get into this. You mentioned his name, and I meant to ask you, Troy. You said he was a huge influence. He was the GM at Grange. Grange, thank you.
Yeah. So he was, like he had left and gone to Sage, and he's the one that kind of was like building me up. He was my partner in crime at moving to Cleveland, because this was a project for him that was like catapulting him to this like GM VP level. And so he brought me in, and he was able to mentor me. He was a big influence in like the people part of this.
How did he influence you?
Just teaching me how to read a P&L, how to like, really talk to people. I mean, my time at Grange, he was the guy that.
So you made it to Grange without knowing how to read a P&L? That I'm not the, like I'm just saying, like,
remember I started there as a line cook.
Yeah.
And so, I didn't need to read a P&L.
They didn't teach you that at
yeah,
the
but
CIA?
like it's different, like it's different.
Until you have numbers there in front of you.
That
like,
means something, right?
Yeah.
That like you can affect. Like I know how to read it. Like I know what the line items were, but like I didn't know how to affect it.
Got you.
And so Troy helped me through that.
So how do you like? I mean, it's kind of would be hard to kind of talk us through that.
Yeah,
any like little details that most people miss.
There's definitely like. I think the general ledger, the money that you spend, each item that you spend money on, adds up. And so like, having the GL and the P&L, and really kind of like using
What's
them
the
as
GL?
tools. The general ledger is a record of everything you spend.
Okay.
So, if I place a produce order tomorrow, that invoice number is going to end up on the GL, and I'll be able to look at that and be like, okay, cool. I spent, $500 on produce.
Okay.
And $300 on meat, and $500 on fish, and then really start to use those tools to figure out where you're over, where you're under, how you have room to give, how you have room to change your pricing, how you have room to, increase your portion size or whatever, right? And then also like if your labor's over a slow time of year, you can kind of use previous P&Ls and to forecast, and you can use the GL to say like, oh, last year when I was on, I spent this much money, and so, you use all those things to kind of tell you how much
you can
money
track
you can
it,
spend.
so you know if you're where you stand versus this week, last month, last year,
right.
So you know if you're doing better or worse.
Right.
Gotcha.
And so Troy taught me a lot of all of that, and he was also on my team. At the end of the day, like before Oliver, when I was trying to get the job at Grange, Michael Toohey, when I was his number 2, like Troy was always kind of there to like cool me down a little bit, or to kind of like mentor me into a space that was like
talk ration to you.
Yeah. I mean, like, whether I was upset or whether I was not upset, right? Maybe I was like riding high, and he's just like, you gotta drill this down. Like you gotta focus on these things. And so, he's the one that kind of like,
you need that person in your life to be honest with you, right?
Yeah.
You need that person that you can have those conversations with and not take it to heart, who's looking out for you, who's a different perspective.
Totally.
Right? Yeah.
And he was always somebody still to this day that like I call and bounce ideas off of, or, he calls me and asks me now, like, about certain like things that I can consult on, maybe like, or, help him with certain ideas about who these chefs are, or the food that they might need to do, or concepts and layouts and things like that. Because I mean, I got a good amount of experience opening that hotel in Cleveland, but I was able to kind of figure out how to parlay that into a full kind of dynamic chef element.
Gotcha. So you got the call to come
Got the
back
call.
home. Thanks
Come
for
back
getting
home.
into that. I appreciate it.
Jan Birnbaum was owned a restaurant called Catahoula in Calistoga. He was a Southern guy, worked for Paul Prudhomme. Then he opened like Epic Roast House down on the waterfront in San Francisco on the Embarcadero. And so he started this consulting company, and he was getting older. And so, or not consulting, recruiting company. And so, because he had these ties to Calistoga, where Solbar is, Brandon Sharp was looking for a number 2. And so I get the call through like a vendor friend, and he's like, you should give Jan a call. So I call him, and he's like, so he interviews me, and I'm like, so is this like an executive chef role? Like, I don't really want to take a step back. And then the whole Michelin Star thing starts presenting itself. Like I hadn't really heard of Solbar, and I had been gone for so long that like, the Michelin world was not something that I was familiar with. And so the Michelin Star thing, and I was like, well, let's talk through this. And they flew me out. I did a tasting. I talked to Brandon. And at that time, like, Auberge Resorts had sold their interest in Solage. Solage was going to kind of become this independent hotel company. I saw a lot of opportunity there. So I was like, okay, this is worth checking into.
So you're I guess the thing that I'm taking from this is that when you are presented with an opportunity, don't be so caught up on titles.
Right.
Be caught up on where is this restaurant going?
Yeah.
Like,
where's my ceiling?
And can I tie myself to this wagon, right? And just like you did before, take a job for the experience. Where did this happen? I feel like it came up earlier in our conversation.
So like when I left Grange,
that's what it was.
There was no opportunity in Sacramento. I was making money at the top of every independent restaurant's chef. I was making that much money. So going to another independent restaurant, not in a hotel, was not really. It was an option, but like it wasn't like something I was really interested in doing, because the ceiling drops, right?
Well, you're removing your ego out of it, and you're willing to join the forces to do something greater than yourself, right? And I think that's the takeaway, is like you can be a part of something greater, and if it does turn out to be something greater, then you can tie your brand to that, right?
Totally.
You can tie your reputation to that. What did we talk about when you had that 6-month run and nobody knew who you were?
Right.
Like now you're tying your name to a Michelin star.
Right.
You're developing a significance, right? It takes time. It takes work to get there, right?
And so, so Brandon offered me the job, and I, gave notice in Cleveland. And I remember like my wife and I driving out of Cleveland, and like the first winter storm is behind us in the rearview mirror, and like, we're on our way back home, and we land in the Napa Valley, which is awesome. And I end up in this place. I was going into a situation that was really difficult for me, because the chef de cuisine I was replacing was still kind of in the fold. He was going to be the executive chef at Brandon Sharp's new restaurant. Brandon was the executive chef at Solbar. And so Gustavo was going to be the chef at Brandon's restaurant. Brandon was staying on as executive chef at Solage. And then, so I was replacing somebody that not only was still in the fold, but somebody who had been there since the beginning. The place had been open 10 years, and he'd been there the whole time. And so I was going, and the work staff up there was a lot of like Latino guys, a lot of Mexican guys, and I worked in California forever. Like I wasn't a stranger to like working with Spanish speaking people, but it was all people that had been there since the beginning. They were super tight.
And they had a Michelin Star since 2008, right?
2008.
Yeah.
So I got there, and they had just gotten their 6th. They got their 6th after I started, and then the 7th was the last one under Brandon, and then the 8th was the one that I was stayed on as the executive chef.
What was that like, getting the Michelin under your leadership?
It was some level of like accountability that I had never been a part of, a stress that I had never been a part of, and
some level of accountability that you've never been. I don't know if I'm picking up.
So I remember like I start there in December. It's like 8 weeks after Michael Bauer comes in, the critic for the Chronicle, and took away a half a star from Solbar. So we were down to 2.5 stars. And I remember like having the conversation, like how bad I felt, cause like here I was like the leader in this restaurant. I was the chef de cuisine of Solbar, and, I was the leader in the restaurant. We lose half a star. And so I was like really kind of like, this is serious. These things matter up here. And so, because you're in the Napa Valley, you have the French Laundry and Bouchon and Meadowood and Latoque and all these Michelin level places that people from all over the world are coming to eat at. And if that doesn't happen, it affects the money.
Yeah, and it affects the entire economy, right?
Yeah.
That area. I can't even imagine that kind of pressure.
And so the Chronicle thing comes out. We lose a half a star. We end up keeping the Michelin Star that year. And so then about a year later, Michael Bauer comes back, and we get that half star back. So now we're back to the 3-star level, and in the Chronicle, and we keep the Michelin Star that year. And it was it's like a big deal, like waiting for that call, and those, because now they do it a little different, but back then they like, you would get a call.
Yeah.
Brandon would get a call, and he'd be waiting, and it'd be like an unknown number on his phone, and like he'd answer it, and then it'd be like, we'd crack the champagne. And the year that I had to wait, they didn't even call me.
What?
I found out on Eater.
Oh, really?
Like the list had got published, and I was like, I found out on Eater, and I was like, just bummed that I didn't get to like.
You're waiting for that phone call.
Stressed.
Yeah,
too,
yeah.
Because at the time, like, I was entertaining the idea of moving back here and opening Canon.
Okay.
And Clay had reached out. Clay and I kind of.
Before you get into that, I'm really curious about something. A lot of people, young people, when they get into this industry, they have a lot of people have these aspirations to win the Michelin Stars, the James Beard Awards, and they don't feel like they are a chef or they're significant until they've been garnered with the accolades. How did you got the accolade, one of the biggest accolades you can get in the industry, a Michelin Star? How did this influence you? Did it have it? Was it what you wanted it to be, or were you kind of let down after getting the star?
For me, it, as the CDC going into those first 2 years, like, it was like call day, right? And I'm like laying in bed at 5 a.m., like refresh, look, trying to find the list on the Chronicle website or the Eater website, or laying next to my wife, and I'm like, this matters. Like, it matters. Like, and I don't know that I thought. I mean, maybe I thought the thought crossed my mind, but like, I lose my job if we lose this star. Yeah. And I don't know that would have actually been the case, but it definitely would have mattered. Yeah. And so like, that is kind of where my headspace was. I was relieved when we got the call. And like, I remember the 3 years that I was involved in that. Like, I remember the day we get the call was the worst services. They were just like sloppy, and like people were kind of like not taking it seriously. Like they had achieved the end of the road. Yeah. And it's not the end of the road, right? It's the start of the next road. Yeah, right. And it just recycles, right? You just got to start over, and that part for me is really exhausting. Yeah. Like, even, and not to get too far ahead, but when Canon got the call for the Bib, I was super excited. A little let down, right? Because you hope for a Michelin Star, but Canon's identity is not a Michelin Star restaurant. Canon's identity is very much this kind of like entertaining, awesome, communal, big flavors, casual type restaurant. And so we've since kind of settled into that. Now, next year, the day that the Michelin guy comes out, like, am I going to be like wanting a star? Yeah, I want a star.
We want, like, I get it. Like, you want it. But I guess the point that I'm trying to make is like cash, right? We always want to make more money. And when we make more money, life's going to be easier, right? And then we realize, no, I still need more. And like, we're insatiable. Insatiable. Thank you. Is it the same with recognition and awards? Like,
I think so. I mean, and I think that there is a game to be played too, right? There is this PR game. There is this whole thing where, like, do I think that my food is as good as anybody else's? Sometimes, do I look at sometimes when like people get accolades and go, would I fit into that bucket? Yeah, I probably would. Like, I do think that, right? But there is something, you still have to stand up and say, look at me. Yeah.
I guess the point I'm trying to make is don't let yourself be defined by the stars and all these things, because it only happens to a small percentage of people. Totally. And when you get them, you're still the same person at the end of the day, right? And you're like, oh, well.
You still have to go out the next day and do a good job, right? And so that was, and part of the reason that I wanted to leave Solbar was to get away from that. Yeah. A little bit. I wanted to come back
the pressure off, just
Sacramento and like do my thing. I was ready to like really put myself out there.
So at this point, while you're here, your business partner, your current business partner, had already reached out to you, Clay Nutting.
Yeah. So Clay and I had met kind of in between that Grange, from the time that Oliver got hired to the point that I left. I was always entertaining. You take every meeting. Yeah. And so I was always kind of entertaining. He and his former business partner owned a couple of restaurants here in town, and they owned one restaurant. They were getting ready to open their second, and they were looking for somebody to kind of run all of them. And so I was kind of talking to them about that. It didn't end up working out. I got a better offer to move to Cleveland, and that was a little more kind of like what I was looking to do. And so we kind of kept in touch, in the very casual sense of like when I came home, and I saw him. We would shake hands and say, hey. We weren't close. And he had got the opportunity he had left Lowbrow and was kind of striking out on his own. And he reached out and he's like, hey, I'm looking for a chef. I was like, are you interested in moving back to Sacramento? And I go, well, yeah, if it's right. I need things. I need ownership. I need to be out in front. I need to be, it's time for me to take my bandwidth and apply it to what I think makes me successful.
How well did you know Clay at this point? You guys worked together? Did you say you worked together?
We had not worked together,
okay.
No. So we spent about a year, maybe not a year, quite a year, like a little less than a year, kind of in courtship, meeting, talking about the space, walking through the space, meeting the landlords, meeting the architects, the designers, before I even signed on. Yeah.
So what was it about Clay that in your gut felt right, that you knew he would be a good partner?
He saw the ability, he saw the value in what I was bringing. Mm-hmm. He was going to let me do my thing, and he was going to let me kind of grow and develop kind of my own identity.
And what was he going to be responsible for?
Front of the house, but like Clay's a guy in design. He's somebody that cares a lot about the front of the house. He cares a lot about management. He's an entrepreneur. So, him and I getting together was definitely like, Canon's not the only thing we want to do. But we got to do this right the first time. Mm-hmm. And so we ended up kind of working through the business end of everything and ended up becoming 50-50 partners in the business. And so the rest is kind of, history. We were able to get 4 stars review in the B. And
I mean, I think another thing that's worth kind of discussing too, I mean, at this point, you had all this reputation, these accolades to back up to legitify your ability, right? How hard was it getting the funding and the capital?
I mean, funding's always hard.
Yeah.
I think I equate restaurants to like buying a Ferrari. Like if you're looking to invest in a restaurant, it's definitely a thing you do as a status. It's a luxury item. It's not an investment you make to make a ton of money in a restaurant like this.
Yeah.
I think that restaurant groups and other concepts and things like that, and we're, we want to develop things like that are really, heavy money makers. But, a place like Canon and a lot of other fine dining restaurants end up being like a place to go for their investors. And so Clay's a great fundraiser. And, I think people were really excited about what we were going to do.
What did you learn from Clay and how he raises funds? How does he go about doing it that makes him successful at it?
I mean, he asked a hard question. Right?
What's the hard question?
The hard question is, do you have any money for me? Because that's the hardest thing. It's so uncomfortable, right? To ask somebody for a bunch of money. Mm-hmm. And, for me, like, I can walk into a room and wow somebody with a plate of food, but like, how'd you like that? Now give me some money. Is a really hard thing to do, you know? And Clay is really good about kind of like parlaying opportunity and success into fundraising. Mm. And, and the entrepreneurial side of what we do, whether it's, lease agreements or, taxes or payroll or, banking or all this stuff, cash flow. Yeah. Right? Cash flow is something that I never even I worked in hotels for 20 years. So
it was just there.
They have cash flow, right? It costs $5 to turn a hotel room, and you make $500 at Solbar. You make $1,000 a night, and so the cash flow was always there. You didn't have to worry about it. But I get here, and it's like, oh, we're waiting for our credit card transactions to come in from the weekend, and it's like, what the fuck? How cash flow is something that you see it, but then you're like, I would see it on a P&L and be like, oh, we have positive cash flow, cool. Like that, I just move on to the next thing and look at my percentages, or whatever. But
what was the first time you saw negative cash flow or not?
Oh, heartbreaking. We were opening a restaurant where we were, we were slightly undercapitalized, and so you run out of money because you're looking at you got to bring in a wine inventory, right? That wine inventory costs $20,000 or whatever it costs you, right? But that's $20,000 you haven't made any money on yet. Yeah. And so it's sitting on your shelf. You're trying to move through it, but you spent the money, but you haven't recouped so you could run a 22% wine cost and be living high on the hog. But if you only sold one bottle of wine at 22%, you're not making any money.
I got you.
So, that was something that, when Oliver opened Camden, that was he asked me the same question, what's the one thing? It's cash flow. I had no idea. I had no idea it was such a thing. Yeah. And so
Cash is king, like
Cash
they say,
is,
right?
you gotta have it in your.
You gotta be liquid. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So that was something that like I learned about very quickly, and we've since been able to become a little more successful in that department.
What things do you do? What practices do you leverage to make sure to guarantee that you have cash flow? Aside from putting out a good business, staying busy,
Well,
are you putting some aside? Is there always a reserve to make sure you have something there?
for us, it's been more of like we started out undercapitalized, so like we didn't have that money, that extra money to like pad on a slow, which we haven't had a ton of slow weeks, and when we first opened, we had 0 slow weeks, so we had a lot of money coming in, and so we were able to kind of like, recoup some of our opening costs, whether it be like, you can't figure out where the bill's going for your trash dumpster.
Yeah.
So like those kind of things, you end up having to work out.
So
those
just
systems.
tracking it, knowing where your money is going. Like managing cash flow is less to do with money coming in and more to do with money going out. When the margins are so small, like the littlest things, like tracking, knowing where every dollar is going and then plugging those holes, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And making sure that you have enough, right? And once you get to that point of positive cash flow, like you sleep a little better at night for sure.
Yeah.
And you get paid and you get the whole like, and it's hard. It's definitely like keeping the doors of a restaurant open are difficult, and they're every day.
Yep.
You're managing that because it's thousands of dollars you're spending to open the doors, and you need thousands of dollars coming in to keep the doors open.
Yeah. I want to redirect the conversation. Earlier you mentioned when you're opening this restaurant, you had to do it right. You want to do other projects,
right,
but you had to do this one right.
Right.
Take me through that mentality of why it makes more sense to do one thing right and what happens because of that.
Yeah. So, we had leveraged a Michelin star, and we, and like Clay had leveraged his previous experiences, and so there was a lot of expectations, and if we didn't meet those expectations, no one was going to give us another chance. And so it's like you can be that person that just flashes in the pan and you're gone, and all of a sudden, like, when the next opportunity comes along, like you don't get the call. And so, for us, we're 2 people with a 50-50 partnership that, have a dinner-only restaurant. Like, we're not getting rich, with the profits of this restaurant, splitting them down the middle. So we're built to open more things. But if you don't do this right, then you never get that opportunity.
This is what's going to get you the next exactly.
Yeah.
This is what's going to if you don't do the one thing right, then why are you going to get other opportunities?
Right.
But if you knock this one out of the park,
right,
then everyone's going to come. Look, people are going to throw money at you
totally,
because they want to be tied to your success.
Totally.
Yeah.
And so we were able to. I ran this place when we opened, like with those systems that we talked about, right? With these really strict systems, and I was direct in the way that we opened this restaurant. And it's like, this is the way we're going to do it. This is how we're going to do it day in and day out. And, I'm going to taste, and we're going to do tasting trays every day at 5:00. Still to this day, we put a black cafeteria tray up in the window that has every piece of every food that we have that goes up to the pass, and either myself or my sous chefs taste it. And, that's a critical control point in what we do every day, because we have 6 quarts of this puree. We taste out 1 tablespoon of it, and if it's not right, then the whole batch is wrong, right? So now we have to go back, but it's a critical control point. We know where that came from, and so we can go back and fix it. And so I ran this business initially to achieve a 4-star review. At that time, we didn't know Michelin was a thing, like in Sacramento, and so it was about doing the best that we can do, treating every service like it was important. Those were things that I often saw in Sacramento that I didn't see in Sacramento, that I saw at Solbar, for instance, like that every service was the Super Bowl, because every service the Michelin inspector could be on the,
or a future investor,
or for So and that so fast forward to Canon, like that's what it was, right? Every thing could be a future investor, and we had to hit and design these recipes and design these dishes in order to be able to execute them the way that we could. So it's like back to outthinking things. We have a small restaurant, small kitchen, three-man cook team, and we're closed for lunch. So like, how do we think this prep schedule through? How do we think the execution of these dishes? Like, how much of it are we cooking to order? How much of it are we reheating? Are we putting a lot of, so what we do is we end up putting a lot of effort and flavor into sauces and things like that we can make in batches and that store well in like deli containers. And then, and then we're able to execute. So, we don't have our style of service is this shareable concept. So we don't have, on your plate, you don't get a steak, steak, veg, and starch. Like you get a steak. And that enables us to really motor, right? We can do 250 covers with 3-4 people.
Streamlining processes.
And just, and really putting it out and develop a style of service that, is fun for people. And so that really enabled us to kind of achieve the goals that we wanted to achieve early on, some national recognition, 4-star review, and then, by the time that Michelin came around or by the time that like the next thing comes around, we're able, we have these systems in place.
Yeah.
So now I'm not there all the time.
Yeah. I think a lot of entrepreneurs and restaurateurs specifically, when they think of growth, they think outwards. Like we need to grow. But growth only comes from inward growth. Like you take that energy that you want to put out and redirect it into doing every little thing that you do in your business as good as possible. And then when you do that, the outward growth comes naturally, right? Because you get opportunity left and right.
And I find that my staff is generally happy because the one thing that I rest solely on my shoulders and the shoulders of my sous chefs is to making sure that everybody has what they need. Whether it's a recipe or product or an idea of a solution to a problem, right? And so and they're empowered to do so if they need to.
It's servant leadership right there.
And so they can think on their feet, but like at the same, they're happy. The worst feeling anybody has, like if you get up in the middle of the night to get a bowl of cereal and you walk out there and someone ate all the cereal, your instant reaction is that of disappointment.
Yeah.
It's the same thing for a line cook. If they're looking for heavy cream and when they go into the walk-in and they're out of it, it's easy to throw your hands up and be like, oh, I can't do this right. So like it has to be there.
Yeah.
And you have to find these systems that allow it to be there.
Yeah. I've loved this conversation. Is there anything we have not discussed up to this point? Any areas that are near and dear to your heart, topics that you want to bring to the surface, anything that you want to get out? Now is the time before we go to the speed round.
I really like cooking. And now the food that I make, I'm really proud of because they're big, like bold flavors. And you hear a lot of this like farm to table talk, especially in Sacramento, this farm to fork capital. For me, that's the price of admission. And so, finding global flavors, finding interesting textures and interesting, ingredients and coupling them with what we grow is, to me, is the way that like, being a chef should be, no matter where you are. You could be in Sacramento, you can be Cleveland, Ohio, you can be in South Africa, for all I care. Like, people need to find those things and really embrace what's around them. And I think that that's how you look at the best restaurants in the world, and that's what they do. And so I hear a lot about this farm to fork thing, and I'm like, you should be doing that.
It's not a trend.
It's not a trend.
It's a movement.
It's a reality.
It's a movement back to the way things should be, right?
Yeah.
We've gotten so far away from what food is,
right?
And we pay the consequences. Our health, the food system is suffering because of it. The earth is suffering because of it, and it's a movement that everybody has to take. I mean, it should be non-negotiable. It shouldn't be a thought. Like, we need to treat food as life. We need to treat it with respect. I've loved this conversation. I like to wrap up every free-flowing portion of the conversation by asking my guests, the mission of Restaurant Unstoppable is to inspire, empower, and transform the industry. So let me ask you, how have you transformed? Who are you today? Who are the man you are today versus the man you were, getting into the industry or as a young cook?
I mean, I think that I've matured in a way that, like, I used to be angry and I used to like really take on the role of like, I need to do this. I need to be the one that does this, and now I think I've transformed into like a different kind of chef where, I use my brain and, I treat people with respect, and, we're in a different time now than we've ever been in this industry specifically, where, it matters who works for you. It matters how much they get paid. It matters, that they're happy. And there's a lot of things that I depend on in the future of my business in order to make sure that I need the people that work for me to be happy. And if I'm not the right person for that, then they're not going to be happy.
I love it.
I need to, so I've worked on transforming.
Oh man, awesome stuff. We're back, and the first question I have for you is, what is your it factor, a habit, a trait, a characteristic you believe most contributes to your success?
Organization.
What is your biggest weakness?
I think kind of aspirations, like trying to do more than I'm ready to do.
Well, I think it's a strength and a weakness, because you got to get outside that comfort zone to know if you're ready for it, and you won't know what it takes until you've tried.
Right.
So you got to you got to stick your foot in the water, right? So it's not, it's a good and bad thing, I'd argue, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. What's one question you ask or thing you look for during the interview process when you're growing your team? What qualities are you looking for?
How clean are you in your real life?
Okay.
What's the backseat of your car look like?
So you're looking in their car?
Not really. I just ask them though.
Yeah.
If they respond with I struggle,
Yeah.
or you ask them questions, because for me it's like they're habit forming things, right?
Yeah.
I'm not the cleanest person in my personal life. The back seat of my truck has a bunch of my kids' clothes and toys and stuff in the back. But when I get to work, I'm like,
Yeah.
it's got to all be right.
Share one code of conduct or behavior you teach your team. This is a way to be, a way to act, a core value.
It's the mantra, mise en place.
Yes. What is one uncommon standard of service you teach your team? So this is something that's common within your four walls, but not common within the industry.
The tasting trays. I think that one check, that critical control point every day, not only does it make sure that the team is accountable to what's on the tray, but they have to go through and make sure that they have everything. They have to go and make sure they see it, that they put their eyes and their mouth and their nose and everything and their eyes on every single piece of their mise en place. And I don't think that happens as much as it should.
What is your biggest challenge today?
Biggest challenge today is always going to be putting butts in seats.
Yeah. How are you combating that challenge?
You just do the best job that you can do. You stay out in the public, like back to our original, thing is staying in the public eye, doing the best job you can, doing podcasts, whatever. But like you said earlier, the margins in this business are pretty low.
Yeah. And
so it's you want a busy day, you want to be full every night.
what's one book that makes a better person or restaurant owner?
Letters to a Young Chef, Daniel Boulud.
Biggest lesson from that book?
Just taking the craft seriously.
What is one thing you feel restaurateurs don't do well enough or often enough?
Think.
What is one piece of technology you've adopted in your restaurant that's had a huge influence on profitability, communication, anything along those lines?
The Google Drive.
The Google Drive. I love it. And this is the last question. It's a doozy, but I should preface, and I need to be better about this. I am an affiliate of Google Drive. Oh. So if you guys are not leveraging Google and you want to start leveraging Google, there will be a link in the show notes. Please support the show. Thank you. Last question. If you got the news, you'd be leaving this world. All the memories of you, your work, and your restaurants would be lost with your departure, with the exception of three things you could leave behind for the good of humanity and for your legacy. What would those three things be?
Let's see. My andouille sausage recipe. Nice. The idea of family-style shareable dining.
Okay.
And community.
Beautiful. I've loved this conversation. Thank you so much. We wrap up every chat by calling somebody out. Who is one independent restaurant operator, somebody you respect and admire and believe would make a great guest mentor like you've made for us today?
Brandon Sharp. Just when he left Solbar, he opened a restaurant called Hawthorne and Wood back in his native Chapel Hill, North Carolina. So he's a person that, I mean, you can't help but respect him just from being in the same room with him. So.
Chef Sharp, look, I'm coming after you. I'd love to get you on the show. And let the folks know, how can we connect with you, Brad? If we want to come join your team, learn from you. You mean one restaurant, you guys are a young company. Like, you went to all these other restaurants as they're young, right?
Yeah.
Opportunity. What's the best way to connect?
Well, we can definitely, through our website, canonesac.com, and through any of our social media, at Canon Esac, on both Instagram and Facebook.
And this is episode 667. Head over to restaurantunstoppable.com/667. I'll have a summary of today's discussion, as well as a link to any tools or services recommended. And again, Brad, just thank you so much for taking the time
my pleasure.
to share your story, your knowledge, your mentorship. There is no questioning. You are unstoppable. Cheers.
Cheers.